Okay, in our last tutorial, we just finished sending a value from one of these buttons to a text field. The button had a instance name, and so did our text field. So we're going to be building on that. Last time, what you'll notice is when we sent our variable, or when we sent our information from here to here, take a look here on our action, we sent, using this function right here, we said choice.text is equal to 1. And you can see that this 1 is in quotes. It's green, which means it's sending the character 1, not the mathematical addable number 1, but the character 1. I could change this to anything. I can change it to hello, and when I send that, it's going to put hello in my text box. The computer doesn't recognize this word as a greeting. It's just some characters, 5 characters. One is an H, one is an E, L, L, and O. That doesn't have any meaning to the computer. It just is characters. Same thing with this 1. When it's in quotes and I send a 1, this is not the mathematical number 1 that's more than 0 and less than 2. It's just a character. Okay, and so what we need to do is differentiate those, because what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be actually adding or sending a number, an addable number. Okay, we're also going to build on that and remember our previous choices. So if you remember, I can send 1 or 2 or any of these numbers, but what gets lost is what our previous choices were. What we're going to do this time is we're going to learn to remember our sort of last. We're going to sort of put in a placeholder in our memory that's going to remember our previous choice. Okay, so we're going to, you can probably start with the file you created last time. So I'm going to copy these. I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to paste these in. First, I'm going to set up my interface. So I'm going to have 4 layers. Top one is going to be actions. This is going to be our text boxes. This is going to be our labels, and this is going to be our buttons. Okay, or this could actually be graphics or whatever, but for now we're going to do buttons. I'm going to paste these buttons exactly where they were. I'm going to actually remove the labels here. I'm going to cut them, Command X, and edit, paste in place, and those go back here. Our text boxes are going to be up here, so I'm going to go to text box. Right now it's static, so I'm going to change that to a dynamic text box. I'm going to drag this over here. I'm going to make sure that it's black, okay, so that it shows up against my white background, and I'm going to give it an instance name. This is going to be called choice. I'm going to copy this, Command C, Command V, and I'm going to put this in line, and I'm going to call this old choice with a capital C, no space. All right, so I've got 2 text boxes, choice and old choice. I've got some buttons, but 1, but 2, but 3, but 4. I'm also going to put some labels in here. So where I've got this on my labels layer, I'm going to put a label up here that's going to say current choice, and this is going to be static text. That's fine. Copy, paste. And this is going to be previous choice. Okay, so right now if I run this, nothing should happen. I'm going to quickly embed my fonts here so I don't get an error. When I run it, these are buttons, so they work, but they don't do anything because we have assigned no information or code to this. So let's do that now. Go to our actions, and we're going to do what we did last time, which was we're going to sort of run a function. When I click on this button, that function is going to send text to this text value. So select this, open up my Actionscript, go to event handlers, double click mouse, click event, and it adds this to my code. I'm going to close this guy. I'm going to get rid of any extra space and instructions. I don't need any of this. I don't need this. So right now, when I run this, all that happens is button 1 has a mouse event listener that runs this function. Click on 1 and it gives me mouse clicked. And great. All right, now I don't actually want that, so what we're going to eventually do, I'll comment that out for now, and I'm going to send some information up here. So that information is going to be targeting choice, which is the name of this text box. Choice.text. In the past we did this, okay, except this time instead of that we're going to be doing something slightly different. For now, we're going to leave it the way it is because this works. But what we need to do is we need to make it a number. Currently, this is just a script. Like I said, it could say hello. And there's no difference to the computer between those two things. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to eventually get rid of the quotes and put just the number 1. The problem is we're going to get an error when we do this because for a couple reasons. One, this is trying to send a number, which is the number 1, the mathematical addable number 1, into a text box. And a text box only accepts a string. So this says here, you're trying to force a number into this box, and this box only accepts strings. So we're going to fix that, but before we do, we need to do a couple things. We're going to create a variable. Now a variable, we've talked about this in class, but a variable is basically a container, a box. So if I've got a box, and in that box I get students to put their late slips into the box as they arrive, at the end of the day I can look in the box and say how many late kids were there, and say there were 5, well there would be 5 slips in that box. And if in period 4 2 more show up, then that box then has 7, or 5, and if I had 5 or I had 2, whatever happens, I end up adding that number to my variable and the variable changes. Well, we're going to create a variable, and that variable is going to be defined by typing var, and you can see it turns purple when I do that because Flash says, oh, I know this. This is when you're going to call a variable and name it. So it turns purple and says, I recognize that. We're going to give it a name. Okay, that's the name. We're going to give it a type, and there are 3 types that we care about right now, but for now we're going to worry about this guy, number. Now a number is a mathematical addable number, okay, which is what we were looking at here. Now I could end it right there, but instead I'm going to give it a value, and that value is going to be 0. Okay, so right now I'm saying, right now, this variable, I want you to remember, the one that's called selected is a number, and the number's value is 0. So if I take this back to what we were talking about a second ago, which was students that are late, at the start of the day, I have 0 students that are late, but by the end of period 1, that variable might end up being 4. By the end of the day, it might end up being 6. Okay? I'm going to change this back to what it was, which is selected, and I can set it back to 0. All right, so right now, let's actually get rid of this, because what we're going to do is we're going to trace the value selected. Okay, let's see what happens. Get rid of the comments. All right, so we run this. When I click this, when I click on this button here, click that button, it's going to run this function. This function says, tell me the value of selected. What's the value of selected? It's 0. When I click this, it should tell me 0. It does. Great. Let's continue. I don't actually want to do that right now, so I'm going to trace that out. I'm going to comment that out. And what I'm going to say is that I want to set the value of this to the value of selected. So I'm going to say choice.text is equal to selected. Now this is not going to work for a specific reason, but let's just take a look at what it does. All right, I run it. It doesn't do anything because it's trying to send, again, a number. This is a mathematical number. We said that selected is a number, and we said make that number 0. And then we said, okay, take that 0 and put it in this text field right here. But I just told you that you can't add a number to a text field. It has to be a string, right? We just looked at that. So to do that, we've got to add just a small piece of code that says toString open close brackets. And what that means is it says take this value, whatever that value is, if it's 4 or if it's 9, and turn it into a string. Okay, turn it into the string equivalent of what this was. So now when I do it, I click this, it's going to say, okay, well, what's the variable? The variable is selected. What's the value? It's 0. When I click this button, it's going to run this function, and the function says make choice.text equal to the string value of selected. Okay, well, let's run that and let's see. There we go, there's our 0. Okay, now that's an addable number. That's not the number 0 in quotes, it's this value. So if I change this value to 10 and I run it, it's going to give me 10 because that's a number. Okay, I could potentially have 2 variables, add them together, and then put the value of that out to that. We're not going to get to that, but right now we're on the right track. Okay, so that's working. Let's set this back to 0. I'm going to go into this guy here. We're going to bring back our trace. Trace is going to give us the value of selected. So I run this, and we modified our function instructions, and now it's going to trace it to an output window, and it's going to add it up here. So let's take a look at what happens. I click this, there's my 0, and here's my 0. Okay, these are both the value of selected. Okay, so let's make some changes now. Let's take this and modify it. I want to make it so when I click on my button, which is labeled 1, instead of giving me selected, I want to give it the number 1 because that's what I chose. So I'm going to say selected, selected equals 1. So now what it's going to do, let's get rid of this guy here, it's going to say this value that I called selected, this number, which was 0, as soon as I click on it here, I want to change it to 1. And then I want you to spit that value out into this guy. So I run this. At this point, our value is still 0. Selected is still equal to 0. When I click this, it's going to run these instructions. First, it makes selected 1, then it spits out that number to our text box. I click here, there's our 1. Great. Let's take a quick look what happens here. This trace happens before I change selected. This is saying, hey, what's the value of selected? At this point, it's still 0, right? I set it to 0, I run the function, and when I run the function, nothing has changed, right? It's still 0. So it's going to spit out 0. Then I change it, then I stick it in that text box. So when I run it, I click this, it traces 0 because it hasn't changed yet, and it also spits out a 1 up here because at this point right here, trace selected gives me my 0. Changes it, updates it, and then spits it out to the text box right there. Okay? Let's go back to this. That happens because this trace, when I ask it, hey, what's the value of selected, it happens before I changed it. If I took this and dragged it down here, what's going to happen now? Selected is 0. I click on the button, selected is 1, then it traces the value, and then it spits out the value. So now it's going to give me, both in my output window and in my text field, 1 and 1. Okay, because I changed it before I traced it. Okay, great. That seems to be working. What we're going to be doing is adding the same code to each of these, but instead of making each of them 1, we're going to make each of them 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's make this a little easier to use by changing this, and I'm going to say button 1 go, and I'm going to write here button 1 go, just so that our function names are a bit easier to understand. Button 1 has a mouse click event, pays attention for a click on this button, and when it does, button 1 goes. Okay, so it's going to send this function. I want a bunch of these, so I'm going to copy this guy, paste it, paste it, paste it, except I don't want them all on button 1. I want one on button 2, one on button 3, one on button 4. I also don't want to run the same function each time. I want to have a new function called 2, 3, and 4, so that when I click on button 1, it runs button 1 go. When I click on button 2, it runs button 2 go. So this is 2. It's going to run a function called button 2 go, but I don't have that yet. I only have 1. So I've got to copy the name of the function and the instructions. Copy. And I'm going to paste that 1, 2, 3 times. And I'm going to modify them. There's button 1. Here's button 2. And I'm going to change selected to 2 because this is the second button. This is going to be button 3. I'm going to make selected 3. And here, that's going to be 4. And this is going to be 4. I'm going to comment out these traces because we don't need the traces for now. I'm going to run my code. I click on 1, it gives me 1. I click on 2, it gives me 2, 3, and 4. Each time, all it's doing is running a function that's specific to the button, and it's changing the selected value to the new value, and then it's spitting out the value into this text box, right? Easy enough. Now we know that when we make a change to the selected, when I say that selected is equal to 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever I make it, it gets updated at this point. Well, what I want to do is I want to remember what it was right before I changed it. So when I start this thing, by default, it starts off at 0. So when I run this right now, selected is 0 because I haven't changed anything. I set it to 0, it's still 0. Not until I click 1 does it change to 1. But before I do this, before I update that value, I want to put it somewhere so I can remember. So I'm going to make a new little piece of code right here. And I'm going to say old choice dot text, which is this guy right here. I want to make the text value of that equal to what selected used to be. So let's do that. Okay, this is called old choice. Here's my actions, and I'm going to say old choice dot text is going to be equal to selected to string semicolon. Right? So now when I click on 1, it's going to say make old choice this equal to what selected was, and at this point it hasn't changed yet, so it's still equal to 0. It's going to stick that 0 up here. Then it's going to immediately change selected to 1, and then it's going to spit out that new value to here. Click on 1, it gives me the 0, is what it was. It updates it and then spits that value out up here. Now I haven't done the rest, so it doesn't do those here, but it will do it every time I hit this. So if I hit 3, my current choice is 3. I hit 1, it's going to put the 3 in my previous choice. So let's add that piece of code to our other functions. That's on the first button. This goes on the next button. This goes on the third and on the fourth. Now when I run this, each time I do this, right now I should be able to track in my head what the value of selected is. Right now it's 0. So when I click on 2, my updated version of this is my updated value for selected is going to be 2. If I click on 3, it's going to update the value to 3. But before it does that, it's going to kick the current value of selected up here in the previous choice. Currently it's 0. So when I click on 3, it gives me that 0. It also puts a 3 here because I chose 3. Now selected is equal to 3. So if I click on 4, it's going to update selected to be 4, and it's going to take what it was and stick it over here. There we go. There's the 3 that was here, and here's the 4 that came from me clicking on this. And now each time I do this, it updates it with the updated version of my last choice. Okay, there are many ways to do this. We could do a similar thing just by taking the old choice text, and instead of making it selected, I could just say make the old choice text, so this, equal to whatever this is, right? That would work too. The only problem would be the first time we ran it, it wouldn't work because the first time through, this has not been given a value yet. But let's ignore that for now. I'm going to put that back as it was. My semicolons in place, and I'm going to copy. Oops. There. Okay, and we should be good. Run that, and everything seems to be working. All right. Try that yourself. If you have any problems, re-watch the video, and hopefully it makes sense.